I was living the dream. Fresh out of college with a degree in marketing, I landed my first job at a prestigious firm in the heart of the city. My days were filled with meetings, brainstorming sessions, and late nights at the office. I loved the hustle and bustle of my new life. I had a great apartment, wonderful friends, and a vibrant social life. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't. It all started with a simple friend request on social media. His name was Mark, and we had a few mutual friends. His profile seemed normal, pictures of family, a few posts about his hobbies. I accepted the request without giving it much thought. That was my first mistake. At first, his messages were friendly and innocuous. He commented on my posts, liked my photos, and even sent me the occasional meme. But as time went on, his messages became more frequent and personal. He started asking questions about my life, my job, my daily routine. I tried to brush it off, thinking he was just being friendly. But then, things took a darker turn. One evening, I was out with friends when I received a message from Mark. Having fun at the bar, it read. I froze. I hadn't posted anything about my plans that night. I looked around, but the bar was crowded, and I couldn't see anyone who looked out of place. From that moment on, I started noticing him everywhere. At the grocery store, at the gym, even outside my apartment building. He never approached me, just watched from a distance. I tried to ignore it, hoping he would get bored and move on, but he didn't. His presence became a constant, gnawing at my sanity. One night, I came home to find a bouquet of flowers on my doorstep. There was no note, but I knew they were from him. Panic set in, and I called the police. They took a report but told me there was little they could do without concrete evidence of a threat. Days turned into weeks, and Mark's behavior became more brazen. He started leaving notes on my car, cryptic messages that made my blood run cold. You look beautiful today. I can't wait to see you again. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next message, the next sighting. The fear was overwhelming. I changed my daily routines, stopped going out as much, and even considered quitting my job. My friends noticed the change and tried to help, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the full extent of what was happening. I felt embarrassed and ashamed, as if it were somehow my fault. One night, I was woken by the sound of breaking glass. My heart raced as I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my bed. I crept down the hallway, my hands trembling. As I turned the corner into the living room, I saw him, Mark, standing in the shattered remains of my window. Why are you doing this? I shouted, my voice shaking. He didn't answer, just stared at me with an unsettling calmness. I raised the bat, ready to defend myself, but before I could react, he lunged at me. We struggled, and I managed to hit him with the bat. He fell to the ground, unconscious. The police arrived minutes later and took Mark into custody. They found a journal in his apartment filled with detailed notes about my life, where I went, who I talked to, what I wore. It was clear that he had been stalking me for months, meticulously planning his every move. Mark was charged with stalking and breaking and entering. I got a restraining order, but the damage was done. I moved to a new city, changed my name, and tried to rebuild my life. But the fear remained, a constant shadow over my shoulder. The weeks following Mark's arrest were a blur. I quit my job and moved to a new city, hoping to start fresh. I changed my name and deleted all my social media accounts, but it was impossible to erase the fear that had taken root in my mind. I started seeing a therapist to help me cope with the trauma. The sessions were difficult, but slowly, I began to feel a semblance of normalcy return. I made new friends and found a new job, but the fear never completely went away. Every time I heard a noise in the night or saw a stranger lingering too long, my heart would race, and I would be reminded of Mark. I installed security cameras around my new apartment and took self-defense classes, determined to never be a victim again. But despite all the precautions, I could never shake the feeling of being watched. It was as if Mark's shadow still loomed over me, a constant reminder of the nightmare I had lived through. One evening, I came home to find a note slipped under my door. My heart sank as I read the familiar handwriting, "You can't escape me." I immediately called the police, but they found no signs of forced entry. They told me it was likely a prank, but I knew better. Mark was still out there, watching, waiting. It was a typical Friday evening, and I decided to spend it shopping at the mall. Work had been particularly stressful that week, and retail therapy seemed like the perfect way to unwind. The mall was my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself among the racks of clothes and the shelves of trinkets. I had recently started a new fitness regime and, in an effort to shed a few pounds, decided to walk to the mall instead of driving. It was only a 20-minute walk from my apartment, and I figured the extra steps would do me good. I didn't think much of it as I left my car keys on the kitchen counter and stepped out into the crisp evening air. The mall was bustling with people, families, and groups of teenagers enjoying their night out. I spent hours wandering from store to store, trying on clothes, and buying a few things that caught my eye. It wasn't until the announcement over the PA system that I realized how late it had gotten. The mall was closing in 30 minutes, and most of the stores were starting to close their shutters. As I made my way toward the exit, I noticed him for the first time. A tall, thin man with unkempt hair and a gaunt face. He was standing near the entrance of a closed store, watching me. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off as paranoia. There were still a few people around, and I was sure he was just another late-night shopper. I quickened my pace, weaving through the sparse crowd toward the exit. As I passed by a jewelry store, I glanced back and saw him again. He was still there, a few steps behind me, his eyes fixed on me. My heart started to race. I told myself to stay calm and keep moving. By the time I reached the food court, the mall was nearly empty. The cleaning crew was beginning to mop the floors, and the last few shoppers were heading for the exits. I ducked into a restroom, hoping to lose him. I splashed some cold water on my face, took a deep breath, and waited for a few minutes before stepping back out. To my horror, he was waiting just outside the restroom. His eyes locked onto mine the moment I stepped out, and a slow, unsettling smile spread across his face. Panic set in, and I darted toward the nearest exit, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. I regretted not bringing my car. The thought of walking home in the dark with this man following me was terrifying. I considered asking for help, but the mall staff were busy closing up, and I didn't want to cause a scene. I decided to head to the nearest security station, hoping they could help. As I approached the security desk, I glanced back and saw that the man was still following me, his pace matching mine. My heart was pounding in my chest as I reached the desk, only to find it empty. Panic rose inside me, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. With no other options, I bolted for the main exit, bursting through the doors into the cold night air. The parking lot was nearly deserted, and the streetlights cast long, eerie shadows. I could hear his footsteps behind me, quickening to match my own. I sprinted across the parking lot, my mind racing with fear and adrenaline. I knew I had to get home, where I could lock the doors and call the police. My apartment was only a few blocks away, but it felt like miles with him closing in on me. I ducked down side streets, trying to lose him, but he was relentless. His footsteps echoed in the silence, growing louder and closer with each passing second. I glanced back and saw him, just a few feet behind me, his face twisted into a sinister grin. Desperation took over, and I knew I couldn't keep running forever. I had to confront him. I turned down a narrow alley, hoping to catch him off guard. I grabbed a loose brick from the ground and waited, my back pressed against the wall, my heart pounding in my ears. He rounded the corner, and I swung the brick with all my might. It connected with a sickening thud, and he stumbled back, clutching his head. I didn't wait to see if he was down. I ran, my legs burning, my lungs screaming for air. I reached my apartment building and fumbled with my keys, glancing back to see if he was following. The street was empty, but I could still feel his presence, a dark shadow lurking in the corners of my mind. I finally got the door open and slammed it shut behind me, locking every lock I had. I collapsed on the floor, shaking and crying, the brick still clutched in my hand. I called the police, my voice trembling as I explained what had happened. They arrived within minutes, and I let them in, my body still trembling with fear and adrenaline. They searched the area and found him a few blocks away, unconscious and bleeding from a head wound. They took him into custody, and I gave my statement, my hands still shaking. They told me I had done the right thing, that I had defended myself. But the fear didn't go away. I spent the next few days in a haze of fear and anxiety. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, felt his presence. The police assured me he was in custody, that I was safe, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I moved to a new apartment, one with better security and closer to my work. I started taking self-defense classes, determined to never be a victim again. But the fear never completely went away. Every time I went to the mall or walked home at night, I felt a shiver of fear, a reminder of that night.